Everyone mocked the alien woman. Everyone was shocked when a human took her hand. Lura had never felt so out of place. The city she had arrived in, a gleaming metropolis of steel and glass, seemed cold, distant, and unwelcoming. She had traveled light years from the distant planet of Veldar, crossing galaxies to represent her people on Earth. But as she stood on the balcony of the embassy building, gazing out at the endless city below, she couldn't help but feel more alone than ever. The Earth people, with their strange customs, loud voices, and mocking stares, didn't understand her. She wasn't like them. She wasn't even like the other aliens who had been accepted by Earth's diplomats. Lura's translucent, shimmering skin caught the light in ways that unsettled the humans she had met. Her body radiated a soft glow, her skin shifting through colors like the surface of a pearl. Her eyes, large and iridescent, reflected the stars, something that left most people uneasy. And her voice, melodic and calm, held a musical cadence that often made her sound like she was singing instead of speaking. No matter how much she tried to adapt to the human world, her appearance and mannerisms only seemed to reinforce the idea that she didn't belong. It wasn't that Earth was a particularly unfriendly place, at least not to most of the alien species that visited. The humanoid species, the ones with features that resembled humans, were generally welcomed with open arms. Their similarities to Earthlings made them easier to understand, easier to accept. But Lura wasn't one of them. She wasn't even close. She had tried. She really had. She attended the galas, the meetings, and the briefings, hoping to be taken seriously. But every time she tried to speak, her words felt like they fell on deaf ears. Diplomats who had greeted her with polite smiles at first now barely looked at her. The few who had dared to engage with her had done so out of necessity, not genuine interest. They didn't want to learn about her home, about her culture. They wanted to hear about her people's technology, something that could benefit Earth. But even then, they mocked her ideas, dismissed her inventions as if they were beneath them. They didn't respect her. They didn't even understand her. Lura had spent countless hours in her quarters, going over her presentation again and again, hoping to make it perfect. She had meticulously prepared every word, every gesture. She had studied Earth's languages, culture, and history, all in an effort to connect with the humans. But no matter how much she tried to blend in, her differences were always too stark. She had come to Earth with hope, with the belief that peace and understanding between her people and Earth were possible. Now she wasn't so sure. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Lura looked up, startled. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Hesitantly, she rose from her seat and walked to the door, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty room. When she opened it, she found a human woman standing there, holding a datapad. The woman had a polite, almost sympathetic expression on her face. "Ambassador Lura, there's a meeting scheduled," the woman said in perfect Veldarian, though Lura could tell it had taken some effort. The woman's accent was thick, the words slightly stilted, but it was clear that she was trying to show respect. Lura nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, I'll be right there." The woman handed her the datapad. "It's just a small briefing, nothing major. I'm sure you're aware of the public reception tomorrow. They'll be expecting you to speak." Lura took the datapad, but the weight of the words hung heavy in her mind. Public reception. She had known about it, of course. She'd been briefed about the event days ago, but the idea of standing in front of thousands of humans, knowing they were judging her, made her stomach turn. "Thank you," Lura said, her voice soft. She didn't know what else to say. The woman gave her a polite smile, but Lura noticed the subtle discomfort in her eyes. It was the same look that everyone gave her, something between curiosity and unease. She hated it. She hated the way humans looked at her as if she were an experiment, a curiosity, rather than an ambassador. The woman turned to leave, but before she did, Lura spoke again. Do you think the humans will ever accept me?" The question hung in the air, unexpected and raw. Lura wasn't sure why she had asked it, but the loneliness that had been building for weeks broke free and the words slipped out before she could stop them. The woman paused, then looked back at her, her face softening. "I think people can surprise you," she said quietly. "They might not understand you now, but give it time. Sometimes it takes a little longer for them to see past the surface." Lura didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. Her doubts had been growing, and it felt like no matter what she did, no matter how much effort she put into making herself understood, the humans wouldn't change. They wouldn't see her as anything other than what they wanted her to be. But the woman's words stayed with her as she walked toward the meeting. "People can surprise you." The briefing was a blur. There were speeches, diplomatic discussions, and more mocking glances from the humans who were present. Lura tried to focus, to speak with the confidence she had been trained to have. But every word felt like a struggle, as if she were fighting against a wall of indifference. It wasn't that they were rude exactly. They just didn't care. Her appearance, her accent, her way of speaking, none of it mattered. They wanted something from her, something they could use, and when they didn't get it, they turned their attention elsewhere. By the time the meeting ended, Lura was exhausted. Her body ached from the tension, and her heart felt heavy with disappointment. She retreated to her quarters again, the silence of the room pressing in on her like a suffocating weight. She sat down at the small desk by the window, looking out at the city once more. The stars were visible, faint but clear, far away in the sky. It felt like a reminder of everything she had left behind. Her planet, her family, her people, all so far away. She had come here with the hope that she could make a difference, that she could bridge the gap between Earth and Veldar. But now, it felt like nothing more than a distant dream. Lura closed her eyes, allowing the quiet to wash over her. For the first time since her arrival, she felt the full weight of her isolation. The humans on Earth would never accept her. They couldn't. She wasn't one of them, and no amount of effort could change that. She would always be an outsider. And then a sudden sound interrupted her thoughts. A faint knock at the door. Lura's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be now? She wasn't expecting anyone else. The knock came again, this time more insistent. Lura was reluctant to open the door, but she knew she had to. She had already withdrawn enough from the world. Reluctantly, she rose from her seat and walked toward the door, her steps slow and heavy with the weight of her thoughts. Whoever it was, she wasn't sure she had the energy to deal with them right now. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see a young human man standing there. His features were ordinary, unremarkable in the way most humans seem to be. But there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of curiosity that set him apart from the others. He was holding a small datapad in his hand, but instead of the usual stiff, formal demeanor that most Earth diplomats carried, he seemed relaxed, almost casual. "Ambassador Lura," he said, his voice calm and friendly, though it was clear he was uncertain how to begin. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm Ethan, a technician for the embassy. I was assigned to do some routine maintenance on the communication systems, and I was hoping you could spare a few minutes." Lura regarded him for a moment, her brow furrowing. She had met many humans during her time on Earth, but none of them had approached her like this. They had all been distant, formal, or even condescending. But this man, he seemed different. "No, you're not disturbing me," she replied softly, stepping aside to let him in. "I appreciate the visit." Ethan gave her a small, uncertain smile as he stepped inside. As he did, Lura couldn't help but notice how his gaze lingered on her for a moment, though he quickly looked away, perhaps out of instinct. It was a look she had seen countless times in the eyes of the Earthlings, fascination mixed with discomfort. She had long stopped expecting any different. He set the datapad down on the table in the center of the room. "I've heard a lot about you, Ambassador. Some of it's less flattering, I'm afraid," Ethan said, his voice quiet, as though he were unsure if he should be saying this at all. "But I think I've also heard some good things. Things that people wouldn't say to your face. things about your people's history, your technology. There's a lot more to you than people realize. Lura didn't know how to respond to this. She had heard the whispers, the snide comments made behind closed doors, but never so directly. It wasn't common for humans to acknowledge their discomfort with her presence so openly. Most would avoid it altogether. I don't believe there's much to say, Lura replied, her voice tinged with sadness. I'm just here to do my job to represent my people, but if the humans don't want to listen, then there's not much I can do. Ethan seemed to hesitate before continuing. I think maybe you've been looking at it all wrong. She looked at him, her interest piqued. How so? He ran a hand through his hair, looking around the room as though trying to find the right words. I don't know much about your people's customs or your planet, but I know one thing. Earth. It's not an easy place to fit in. It's hard for everyone, even the people who were born here. And it's even harder when you're different like you are. But that doesn't mean there aren't humans out there who want to understand, who want to listen. Lura could feel the weight of his words. They weren't just empty reassurances, like the ones she had heard from others who had been paid to say them. There was something genuine in his voice. It was the first time in weeks that someone had shown her any sort of understanding without a hidden agenda or a mocking tone. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan's expression softened and he finally met her gaze, though he seemed almost embarrassed. "Because I think you deserve better than what you've gotten, I think. I think it's not just about your differences. It's about human nature. We're all a little broken, but some of us are willing to try to put those pieces together, even if it's hard." Lura was silent for a long moment. She wasn't sure what to say. The bitterness and disappointment she had been carrying for so long seemed to lessen, but only slightly. She couldn't help but wonder why he, of all people, was showing her this kindness. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not like the others. Why have you come to speak with me?" Ethan smiled, a little shyly, but there was warmth in his expression. "Because I think everyone deserves a chance. Even if it's just one person who's willing to listen, it's worth it. I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong, to feel like no one sees you for who you really are." Lura stared at him, unsure of how to respond. His words were so different from anything she had heard before. Earth had not been kind to her, and yet here was this man, a complete stranger, offering her something no one else had: acceptance, even if it was small. "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything will be fine," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep fighting for something no one believes in." Ethan's face softened. "It's okay to feel that way, but you don't have to fight it alone. Not everyone will mock you. Not everyone will turn their back on you." Lura felt something stir in her chest. A small, fragile hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She wasn't sure what Ethan's words meant for her future, or whether the Earth would ever accept her. But for the first time since she had arrived, she felt like she had someone on her side. They talked for a while longer about Earth, about Veldar, about the things that connected them and the things that set them apart. Ethan didn't have all the answers, but he listened. And that for Lura was enough. As the conversation drew to a close, Ethan stood up, gathering his datapad. "I'll leave you to your work, Ambassador, but if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm not hard to find." Lura smiled softly, a faint but genuine smile. "Thank you, Ethan. I appreciate it more than you know." Ethan nodded and walked toward the door, but before he left, he paused. "I mean it, Ambassador. Don't let the world convince you that you don't matter. You do." As he left, Lura sat back down at her desk, her mind racing with thoughts. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time since her arrival on Earth, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was fragile, but it was there. The days that followed felt different for Lura. For the first time since her arrival on Earth, she began to feel a strange sense of calm. The isolation she had once felt seemed a little less suffocating. Ethan's words echoed in her mind, and the connection they had formed, however brief, gave her a flicker of hope. She had always believed that Earth could be a place of understanding, a place where her people could connect with humanity. But now, for the first time, she wasn't sure if it was the planet itself that needed changing, or if it was the people who had to see beyond their fears. She spent the following days preparing for her public presentation. She had done this many times before in many different places, but this time something felt different. She had never spoken in front of a crowd this large. The stakes were higher. The Earth diplomats had told her that this speech could decide the future of the relationship between Earth and Veldar. It wasn't just about the technology or the trade deals anymore. It was about whether she and her people could be accepted, whether the differences that separated them from humanity could be bridged. As she sat alone in her room, going over her speech for the 100th time, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The humans she would address were skeptical. Many of them didn't even want to be there. They had seen her as an outsider, a symbol of everything that was wrong with the idea of peaceful coexistence between Earth and other species. But something in her had changed. She wasn't just presenting technology anymore. She was presenting herself. She was no longer going to try to fit into their mold. She was going to be who she was and let them decide whether they could accept that. When the day of the presentation arrived, Lura was surprised by the number of people who showed up. It wasn't just the diplomats and officials. There were reporters, technicians, and even a few curious citizens who had been invited to witness the event. As she stood backstage, waiting for her turn to speak, Lura couldn't help but feel the familiar nerves. It was a feeling she had always fought against, but now it seemed to be part of the process. There was no way to avoid it. She had practiced her speech so many times, but now that she was standing there with the eyes of Earth upon her, it all seemed so trivial. What would her words matter when the humans already had their minds made up? She had heard the whispers, the doubts, the questions about her people's true intentions. She had tried to ignore them, but now they seemed louder, more persistent. The announcer called her name and Lura stepped forward, her heart pounding. The room fell silent as she walked to the podium, every step echoing in the quiet hall. As she stood before the crowd, she took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had come here with a purpose, and now it was time to deliver. She began to speak, her voice clear but trembling slightly. She talked about Veldar's history, the peaceful existence of her people, and the advances they had made in energy and technology. She spoke of the possibilities that cooperation between their species could bring, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. She spoke of hope, of unity, of a future where the differences between them could be celebrated rather than feared. But the longer she spoke, the more she could feel the tension in the room. It was as though her words were falling on deaf ears. She glanced at the faces in the crowd, but they were hard to read. Some seemed interested, but many were indifferent. A few had even started whispering to one another. It was the same response she had encountered time and time again. The skepticism, the fear, the uncertainty, it was all too familiar, but Lura refused to give up. She continued, speaking from her heart, hoping that something in her words might reach them. She couldn't force them to understand, but she could try to show them that peace and understanding were possible. She had come too far to let fear stop her now. Then unexpectedly something happened. One of the humans in the back of the room, Ethan, stood up. His movements were slow at first, as though unsure of what he was doing, but he stood up and began to walk toward the stage. The room went quiet. All eyes were on him. Lura's heart skipped a beat. Why was Ethan standing? He wasn't supposed to be here. He was just a technician, someone who had helped her behind the scenes. But now he was here in front of everyone, and his presence was so unexpected that it sent a wave of confusion through the crowd. Ethan didn't speak at first. He just walked toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. As he reached the podium, he stopped. The room was so silent, Laura could hear her own heartbeat. She wasn't sure what he was going to do. Was he going to interrupt her speech? Was he going to embarrass her in front of everyone? Instead, Ethan extended his hand toward her, and with a calm but resolute gesture, he took her hand in his. The room erupted into gasps of shock and confusion. It was as though time had stopped. Everyone in the audience stared at them, unsure of what to make of the moment. But for Laura, in that instant, everything else disappeared. She felt the warmth of Ethan's hand in hers, and it was the first time since her arrival on Earth that she felt truly seen, truly understood. Ethan's gesture wasn't just an act of kindness. It was an act of rebellion against the isolation and prejudice that had surrounded her since the moment she stepped foot on this planet. It was a statement. It was a challenge to the others in the room. It was his way of saying, "You are not alone." The silence stretched on, but this time it wasn't filled with skepticism or fear. It was filled with something else, something that Laura couldn't quite place. Was it respect? Was it acceptance? She couldn't say for sure, but she knew one thing. Ethan had just done something that no one else on Earth had done for her. He had shown her that not all humans were the same. There were some who were willing to listen, who were willing to see beyond the surface. After a long moment, Ethan let go of her hand and turned to address the crowd. "I know there's a lot of doubt about what Ambassador Lura and her people bring to the table," he said, his voice steady. "But I've worked with her. I've seen what she's capable of. And I believe she's not here to take anything from us. She's here to offer something. We might not understand it yet, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We should listen. We should try to see what she's offering before we dismiss it." The room remained silent, but there was a shift. It wasn't a loud, dramatic change, but Laura could feel it, a subtle shift in the air, a small crack in the wall of skepticism that had surrounded her. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe Earth could change. Maybe humanity could look beyond their fears and see the potential for something greater. The days that followed were unlike anything Laura had experienced on Earth. Ethan's gesture, taking her hand in front of the crowd, became the talk of the media. News outlets, social media, and even casual conversations buzzed with a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and admiration. Some saw it as a bold act of unity, others as a sign of defiance, but no one could deny that something had shifted. The walls of indifference, the prejudice that had kept her isolated, seemed to be crumbling, one small piece at a time. Laura still couldn't quite believe what had happened. Ethan's support had been unexpected, but it had meant more to her than words could express. She had always believed that change was possible, that peace between Earth and her people could be achieved. But now, she felt a strange sense of hope that she hadn't dared to feel before. Maybe it wasn't just about bridging the gap between her people and Earth. Maybe it was about bridging the gaps between individuals, one person at a time. In the weeks that followed, Laura and Ethan found themselves working together more and more. He had continued to assist her with her technological demonstrations, but there was more to their connection than just shared work. They spent hours talking about their worlds, their cultures, their hopes. Ethan was an open book, unafraid to share his thoughts and struggles. He spoke honestly about the ways humans, as a species, were still trying to figure things out. The flaws in their society, the misunderstandings, the fears. But he also spoke about the good, the things that made humanity worth believing in. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was always trying to be better. For her part, Laura shared her own experiences, her history, the struggles of her people. Veldar was a peaceful world, one that had learned to coexist without conflict. But it wasn't a world without its challenges. The journey to harmony had been long and difficult. She realized in her conversations with Ethan that Earth wasn't so different from Veldar in that way. It was a work in progress, still learning, still growing. The path to understanding wouldn't be easy, but maybe it was possible. But even as things seemed to be improving, the challenges weren't over. The skepticism that had plagued her presentation hadn't disappeared completely. While many people had been moved by Ethan's act of solidarity, others remained firmly entrenched in their doubts. Some saw her as an outsider, too different to ever truly integrate. Others were more concerned with the political ramifications of her technology, especially the parts that could disrupt Earth's energy industries. There were powerful people, powerful corporations, who stood to lose a lot if the Veldarian technology was adopted. It became clear to Lura that the path to acceptance wouldn't be an easy one. She would have to prove not just her technology but her worth. It wasn't enough to speak from the heart. She had to show them that her people's advances weren't a threat, that they could be a benefit to Earth and its future. One evening, Lura and Ethan were alone in the embassy's conference room, reviewing a new proposal for a joint project between Earth and Veldar. The project was designed to introduce Veldarian energy technology to Earth, a more sustainable alternative to the planet's current power sources. It was the kind of innovation that could change everything, but the proposal wasn't without its risks. The technology was advanced, too advanced for some, it seemed. The corporate interests who stood to lose the most from it had already started lobbying against it. "We have to make them see that this is the future," Lura said, her voice determined but weary. "If Earth accepts this, we can shift the balance. This could change everything." Ethan nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I know, but you can't convince people like that with just technology. You'll have to convince them it's worth the risk. You'll have to show them that this isn't just about the bottom line, it's about something bigger." Lura looked at him, unsure of how to approach the challenge. "I'm not sure how to do that. They don't understand. They don't want to understand." "You've got to show them," Ethan said, standing up and walking over to the presentation table. "I think we should do something different this time, not just a speech or a demonstration. We need to show them what this technology means, not just for the environment but for people, real people." Lura raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you have in mind?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I think we need to bring it to them. Not in a sterile, controlled environment, but in a way that makes them see the impact. We'll take the technology to a community that needs it. Let them see firsthand how it can change lives." Lura considered his suggestion. It was bold, maybe even risky. But it was exactly what they needed. That could work. We could find a community on Earth that's struggling with energy scarcity. If they see the technology in action, they might be more likely to accept it. Together, they began to plan. The following days were filled with intense preparation. They reached out to local authorities in a region on Earth where energy shortages had caused significant hardship. It was a small, rural town, one that had been largely ignored by the larger cities and the corporate elites. The people there struggled with power outages, high energy costs, and pollution. It was a place where Veldarian technology could make a real difference. When they arrived in the town, Lura was taken aback by the conditions. The buildings were old, the streets narrow and poorly lit. The air smelled of smog, and the residents seemed to move about in a haze, as though the weight of their daily struggles had worn them down. It was a far cry from the sleek, advanced cities Lura had seen on Earth. But it was also a place where change was needed. The demonstration began. Lura and Ethan set up the Veldarian energy generators in the town's main square, where a small crowd had gathered, curious but skeptical. It wasn't the glamorous setting they had hoped for, but it didn't matter. The technology, as advanced as it was, could speak for itself. As the generators powered up, the lights in the square flickered on for the first time in years. The air grew cleaner, the energy more stable. People began to gather, murmuring among themselves, watching in awe as the technology they had been promised but never seen before came to life before their eyes. It wasn't just the lights that changed. The people of the town felt it too. For the first time in years, they felt hope. Children ran through the streets, laughing, playing in the light. The elderly stood up straighter, feeling the warmth of power they hadn't had access to in far too long. The energy wasn't just a convenience, it was a lifeline. As Lura watched the reactions of the townspeople, she realized something. It wasn't the technology alone that would win Earth's acceptance, it was the humanity behind it. The willingness to take risks, to show compassion, to understand that progress wasn't just about profit, it was about making a real difference in people's lives. Ethan stood beside her, watching the crowd. He turned to her with a quiet smile. "I think they're starting to get it." Lura nodded, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Maybe we all are." The news of the demonstration spread quickly, and soon the entire world was watching. People who had once feared what the Veldarians could bring to Earth were now beginning to understand. Lura's message of unity, of hope, was no longer just words, it was real. It was happening. And for the first time, she believed that Earth, despite its flaws and struggles, was capable of something better. As the sun set on the small town, Lura stood in the square, feeling the pulse of the new energy beneath her feet. She wasn't just an alien anymore. She was an ambassador for a new future, and the world was finally ready to listen.